The courtroom smelled like old wood and desperation. I sat in the witness box, watching 200 pairs of eyes stare at me like I was holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. My name's Warren Gallagher. I'm 51 years old, and in the next 15 minutes, my testimony would either destroy Meridian Therapeutics or let them walk away from killing 4 people. The company's lawyers sat on the left, $900 suits and confident smiles. The plaintiff's attorneys sat on the right, tired faces and thick folders full of hope. Both sides had spent the last 6 months trying to get me on their team. Neither side knew what I was actually going to say. Let me tell you how a maintenance technician from Montana ended up being the most important person in a $340 million wrongful death lawsuit. Back in 1989, I enlisted in the Air Force right out of high school. Spent 6 years as an aerospace maintenance technician, keeping F-16s flight-ready at bases across the Pacific. You learn something valuable working on fighter jets that most people never understand. Every system has failure points, every process has warnings before disaster. And when something goes wrong at 30,000 feet, there's usually a paper trail showing someone ignored the signs. That mindset followed me into civilian life, and 18 years later, it was about to matter more than I ever imagined. When I left the Air Force in 1995, I needed work. Meridian Therapeutics was barely a company back then, more like a research lab with ambitions run by Hugh Brennan and 2 university professors who discovered a promising compound for treating autoimmune diseases. They had brilliant science and zero operational infrastructure. Their manufacturing process was held together with duct tape and optimism. I walked in for an operations position and found organized chaos masquerading as pharmaceutical development. Hugh hired me because I was the first candidate who actually understood what CGMP compliance meant and why the FDA would shut them down within 6 months if they didn't fix their quality systems. For the first 5 years, I built everything that wasn't pure research. Quality control protocols, manufacturing documentation, equipment maintenance schedules, safety inspection procedures, the unsexy infrastructure that keeps a pharmaceutical company running and keeps regulators from padlocking your doors. By 2000, we had our first FDA approval, and I'd become the person who knew where every bolt was supposed to be tightened and why. In 2003, we built our own manufacturing facility in Research Triangle Park. A $45 million investment that Hugh called our ticket to the major leagues. I supervised every aspect of the construction, worked with engineers on equipment specifications, created the maintenance protocols that would keep the facility running safely for decades. I knew that building better than I knew my own house. Every valve, every pressure gauge, every safety interlock. When something beeped wrong at 3 a.m., I was the one who got called. My wife Rebecca died in 2012. Ovarian cancer. 8 months from diagnosis to funeral. Our daughter Claire was 6 years old. Too young to understand why Mommy wasn't coming home, old enough to know something terrible had happened. I buried myself in work because that's what you do when grief threatens to swallow you whole. 18-hour days, weekend shifts, anything to avoid sitting in an empty house with a child who kept asking when Mommy was coming back. Claire grew up watching me choose work over presents. Her 7th birthday party, where I arrived 2 hours late because of an equipment emergency. Her school plays where I sat in the back row answering emails on my phone. The father-daughter dance I forgot entirely until she called crying from the school gym. She learned early that Meridian Therapeutics was her father's first priority, and she stopped expecting anything different. By 2024, I was Director of Operations, reporting to Hugh Brennan. The title sounded impressive, but the reality was that I did everything nobody else wanted to handle. Equipment failures, regulatory inspections, safety audits, crisis management. The invisible work that kept the company functioning while executives collected bonuses and attended conferences. Then Devin Brennan arrived. Hugh's nephew, 29 years old with a Yale MBA and the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. He showed up in January with a new title, Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations. My new boss. A kid who'd never worked in pharmaceutical manufacturing, never handled an FDA inspection, never seen what happens when a pressure vessel fails at 2 a.m. But he had ideas about efficiency and modernization and cost reduction that made the board very excited. The meeting where everything changed happened in February. Devin called me into his new corner office, the one that used to belong to our retired CFO, and explained his vision for transforming Meridian's manufacturing operations. "Warren, I've been analyzing our cost structure," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "Our maintenance budget is significantly higher than industry benchmarks. I'm implementing a 30% reduction starting next quarter." I felt my stomach drop. "Which maintenance categories are you cutting?" "Preventive maintenance, primarily. Our equipment uptime is 94%. Industry standard is 89%. We're clearly over-maintaining, which means we're wasting money on unnecessary procedures." I tried to explain. "Devin, our uptime is 94% because of the preventive maintenance. If we cut those procedures, we'll see equipment failures that could shut down production for weeks. Or worse." He finally looked at me with the patient smile of someone humoring a slow child. "Warren, I appreciate your experience, but I've done the analytics. The data supports optimization. We're not eliminating maintenance. We're right-sizing it." Right-sizing. A word that meant cutting things someone didn't understand until something broke catastrophically. I spent the next 3 months documenting every warning I gave. Emails about pressure vessel inspection schedules, memos about temperature sensor calibration, reports about the aging containment systems in our biologics processing unit. Each time, Devin responded with some variation of noted, "But we're proceeding with the optimization plan." I kept copies of everything, not because I was planning anything, but because 20 years of military training had taught me that paper trails matter when things go wrong. The accident happened on a Thursday in May. I was home for once, eating dinner with Claire for the first time in weeks, when my phone started buzzing, then buzzing again, then the ringtone I'd programmed for facility emergencies. By the time I answered, I could hear sirens in the background. "Warren, it's Jim from night shift." His voice was shaking. "We've got a containment breach in Building C, the pressure vessel in biologics processing. It's bad. Really bad." I was in my car within 90 seconds, driving toward the facility while Jim described the chaos. A pressure vessel had failed catastrophically during a production run. The safety interlocks that should have shut down the system had malfunctioned. 4 workers had been exposed to a toxic compound at concentrations that overwhelmed the containment protocols. When I arrived, the parking lot looked like a disaster movie. Fire trucks, ambulances, hazmat teams, workers standing in clusters, some crying, some just staring blankly at the building that had been their workplace that morning. I found Jim near the incident command post, his face pale under the emergency lighting. "How bad?" I asked. He just shook his head. 2 already gone. 2 more in critical. The pressure vessel. It just went. No warning. The safety systems didn't engage, but I knew there had been warnings. Plenty of them. In February, I'd flagged that exact pressure vessel for comprehensive inspection based on its service hours. Devin had pushed the inspection to Q3 to stay within his reduced maintenance budget. In March, I'd noted that the safety interlock system was showing intermittent calibration drift. Devin had approved a software patch instead of the full recalibration I'd recommended. In April, I documented unusual vibration patterns during operation. Devon had scheduled a review for June. Every warning ignored, every cost-saving measure prioritized over safety. And now, 4 people were dead or dying because a 29-year-old with an MBA thought he understood manufacturing better than the people who'd kept the facility running safely for 20 years. The next 72 hours were chaos. 2 OSHA investigators, FBI agents, state regulators, insurance adjusters, lawyers from firms I'd never heard of. Everyone wanted to know what happened, but more importantly, everyone wanted to know whose fault it was. I told the truth to the investigators, showed them my documentation, explained the maintenance cuts, the ignored warnings, the systematic prioritization of cost savings over safety protocols. They took notes, asked follow-up questions, and told me not to discuss the investigation with anyone from the company. That last part became important very quickly. On Sunday morning, 3 days after the accident, Hugh Brennan called me personally. "Warren, I need you to come to my house," he said. His voice was strained in a way I'd never heard before. "We need to talk about the investigation." I drove to his McMansion in the suburbs, the one I'd been to exactly twice in 18 years for company parties. Hugh answered the door himself. No housekeeper, no wife visible, just him and the weight of 4 deaths pressing down on his shoulders. We sat in his study, surrounded by awards and photographs of Hugh shaking hands with important people. He poured 2 whiskeys without asking if I wanted one. "Warren, this accident is going to destroy us," he said, staring at his glass. "The families are already talking to lawyers. We're looking at wrongful death suits, regulatory penalties, possible criminal charges. Everything I've built for 30 years could be gone." I didn't respond, just waited for him to get to the point. "The investigators are going to want to assign blame," he continued. "They're going to look for someone to hold responsible. Right now, they're focused on maintenance procedures and safety protocols. Those procedures were changed," I said carefully, "over my documented objections." Hugh nodded slowly. "I know. I've seen your emails, your memos. You were very thorough about documenting your concerns. I've always believed in paper trails." He set down his glass and looked at me directly for the first time. "Warren, those documents could be interpreted different ways. They could show that you raised concerns that were addressed through appropriate management decisions, or they could show that the person responsible for equipment maintenance failed to escalate critical safety issues through proper channels." I felt my jaw tighten. "Are you suggesting I didn't escalate properly?" "I'm suggesting that memories can be complicated, that documentation without context can be misleading, that reasonable people might disagree about what constitutes adequate warning. What do you want, Hugh?" He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check. I could see enough zeros to know it was a life-changing amount of money. "I want you to remember events in a way that distributes responsibility appropriately." Devon made some aggressive decisions. Yes. But he was working with information provided by the operations team. Your team. If there were maintenance issues, you failed to communicate effectively. If the documentation was unclear, if the escalation protocols weren't followed precisely, then the blame shifts from Devon to me, to a more distributed accountability model. I looked at the check, looked at Hugh, looked at the photographs on his wall showing decades of success built on a foundation that had just crumbled. People are dead, Hugh. Yes, and nothing we do now will bring them back. But how we handle the next few months will determine whether Meridian survives, whether 300 jobs continue to exist, whether the research programs that could save thousands of lives get to continue. This is bigger than blame, Warren. This is about protecting everything we've built. I stood up without touching the envelope. I need to think about this. Don't think too long. The investigation moves quickly. I drove home in a daze. 4 people dead. My employer asking me to shade my testimony to protect the nephew whose cost-cutting had killed them. A check with enough zeros to send Claire to any college in the country, pay off my mortgage, and fund a comfortable retirement. All I had to do was adjust my memory of events. Let the blame spread to places that were more legally convenient. Claire was waiting when I got home. "Dad, you look terrible." "What happened?" I sat down at the kitchen table and told her everything. The accident, the victims, the documentation I'd created, the offer Hugh had just made. She listened without interrupting, her 14-year-old face showing wisdom beyond her years. When I finished, she asked one question. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." She nodded slowly. "Mom would have known what to do. Your mother always had a clear sense of right and wrong." "You do too, Dad. You just forget sometimes because work gets complicated." She paused. "Those people who died. Did they have families?" I thought about the personnel files I'd reviewed. Jim Morrison, 34, 2 kids under 5. Sandra Vega, 41, single mom with a teenage daughter. Pete Okonkwo, 28, engaged to be married next spring. Rachel Chen, 52, grandmother who'd worked at Meridian for 15 years. 4 lives, 4 families destroyed. "Yes," I said quietly. "They had families." "Then you already know what to do." Smart kid. She'd cut through all the complexity and found the simple truth underneath. I did know what to do. The question was whether I had the courage to do it. Monday morning, I arrived at the facility to find new faces in the executive suite. Crisis management consultants, additional lawyers, a communications team preparing statements about Meridian's commitment to safety and transparency. Devin was notably absent. I later learned he'd taken a leave of absence for personal reasons, which was corporate speak for "we're hiding him until the lawyers figure out our strategy." The OSHA investigation continued. FBI agents came back with more questions. I answered everything truthfully, showed them all my documentation, explained exactly how the maintenance cuts had created the conditions for the accident. They thanked me for my cooperation and asked if I'd be willing to testify if there were legal proceedings. "Yes," I said. "I'll testify." Within 2 weeks, the families of the 4 victims filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Meridian Therapeutics, $340 million in damages. The lawsuit named the company Hugh Brennan personally, and Devin Brennan specifically for his role in the maintenance decisions that led to the accident. When I read the complaint, I recognized large portions of my documentation quoted directly. Someone had leaked my memos. That's when both sides started calling. The plaintiff's attorneys reached out first. A woman named Victoria Santos from a firm that specialized in industrial accident cases. She'd seen my documentation in the discovery process and wanted to discuss my potential testimony. "Mr. Gallagher," she said during our first meeting, "you're the most important witness in this case. You documented every warning. You predicted exactly what would happen. Your testimony could be the difference between these families getting justice and Meridian's lawyers burying the truth in legal technicalities." "I just told the truth," I said. "I didn't plan to be anyone's star witness." "Sometimes truth-tellers become the most important people in the room," she replied. "Would you be willing to work with us?" I told her I'd testify truthfully, but I wasn't going to work with anyone. My job was to tell what happened, not to be on a team. She accepted that with a nod that suggested she'd heard it before. Meridian's lawyers were more aggressive. They scheduled a formal interview under the guise of preparing for regulatory hearings. 3 attorneys in a conference room asking careful questions designed to probe for weaknesses in my account. "Mr. Gallagher, when you sent these emails about maintenance concerns, did you follow the proper escalation procedures outlined in the employee handbook?" I sent them to my direct supervisor, who at that time was Devin Brennan. But did you escalate to the safety committee? To the board? To external regulators? My direct supervisor was responsible for bringing critical safety issues to the appropriate parties. I communicated my concerns through proper channels. They kept probing, looking for procedural gaps they could exploit, looking for ways to shift responsibility onto my shoulders. I answered every question honestly, and with every honest answer I could see their frustration growing. After the formal interview, one of the lawyers pulled me aside. "Warren," he said quietly, "the company wants to make this right. We know you've been a loyal employee for 18 years. We know you raised concerns that weren't adequately addressed. But litigation is about perception, and right now, the perception is that Meridian ignored safety warnings from its own operations director. That perception could destroy the company. The perception is accurate." He winced slightly. "There are ways to present information that provide context, that show the complexity of operational decisions, that distribute responsibility more evenly across the organization. Are you asking me to lie under oath? I'm asking you to consider how your testimony could be framed to reflect the full picture rather than a simplified narrative that benefits the plaintiffs. The full picture is that Devin Brennan cut the maintenance budget by 30%, ignored multiple documented warnings, and 4 people died as a direct result. That's not a simplified narrative. That's what happened." He stared at me for a long moment. Then his expression shifted from persuasion to something colder. "Warren, you should think carefully about your future. After this lawsuit concludes, you'll still need to work somewhere. Pharmaceutical manufacturing is a small industry. Reputations follow people. Is that a threat? It's reality. Witnesses who are perceived as disloyal to their employers find it difficult to advance their careers. Companies don't want to hire people who might testify against them someday." I felt something harden inside me. The same feeling I'd had in the military when superior officers made bad decisions and expected enlisted men to take the blame. "I know what my testimony is worth," I said, "and I know what my integrity is worth. They're not the same number." I walked out of that conference room knowing I'd just made powerful enemies, but I'd also made a decision that I could live with, which mattered more than job security or career advancement. The next few months were a gauntlet, depositions that lasted 8 hours, document reviews that required explaining every email I'd sent in the past 2 years, preparation sessions with both legal teams trying to anticipate what the other side would ask. Through all of it, I maintained the same position. I would tell the truth about what happened. I would let the documents speak for themselves. I would not shade, adjust, or interpret my testimony to benefit either side. Meridian's lawyers tried different approaches. They offered me a consulting contract worth $200,000 per year to retire early and be available for expert testimony on their behalf. I declined. They suggested that certain documents might have been miscategorized or misfiled, creating an opportunity to question their authenticity. I provided the originals with timestamps that verified everything. They implied that my daughter's college prospects might be affected if I became known as someone who testified against major corporations. I told them to leave my daughter out of it. The plaintiff's attorneys were more subtle in their approach. They treated me like a hero, which made me uncomfortable. They quoted my documentation like it was scripture, which made me nervous about their expectations. They asked me to review their trial strategy, which I refused because I wasn't on their team. I was just a witness who happened to have written down everything that mattered. Claire watched all of this unfold with the quiet attention that had become her trademark. One evening, about a week before the trial was scheduled to begin, she asked me the question that had been hanging over everything. "Dad, are you scared?" I thought about it carefully before answering. Scared of testifying? No. Scared of what happens after? Maybe. What do you mean? After this trial, whatever happens, my career at Meridian is probably over. Maybe my career in pharmaceuticals entirely. The lawyer was right about one thing. Companies don't like employees who testify against them. So what will you do? I don't know yet. Find something else. Maybe start over in a different industry. I'm 51 years old, which makes starting over harder but not impossible. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised me. Mom would be proud of you, you know. I felt my throat tighten. Why do you say that? Because you're doing the right thing even though it's going to cost you. That's what she always said was the real test. Doing right when it's free is easy. Doing right when it costs something is character. Smart kid. She understood things at 14 that some people never figure out. The trial began on a Monday in October. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members of the victims, Meridian employees, and curious members of the public who'd followed the case. Hugh Brennan sat behind the defense table, looking smaller than I remembered, like the stress had physically diminished him. Devin was there too, back from his leave of absence, wearing a suit that probably cost more than the monthly salary of any worker in our facility. The first week was opening statements and technical testimony. Engineers explained what had failed. Safety experts explained what should have prevented it. Regulators explained what standards had been violated. The ground was being prepared for the main event. Witnesses who could explain how it happened and who was responsible. I was scheduled to testify on Wednesday of the second week. The night before, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous about the questions, but because I knew that tomorrow would determine the direction of multiple lives. The victims' families waiting for accountability. Meridian employees worried about their jobs. Hugh and Devin facing potential personal liability. And me, sitting in the middle, holding truth like a weapon I hadn't asked to carry. The courtroom fell silent when I walked to the witness stand. I could feel eyes on me from every direction. Victoria Santos for the plaintiffs. Martin Shaw, lead defense attorney for Meridian. The judge, who looked tired already. The jury, 12 ordinary people about to hear testimony that would shape their decision. The plaintiffs examined me first. Victoria walked me through my background, my qualifications, my 18 years at Meridian. Then she got to the substance. Mr. Gallagher, in February of this year, did you document concerns about the pressure vessel that eventually failed? Yes, I did. Can you describe those concerns? I noted that the pressure vessel had exceeded its recommended service hours for comprehensive inspection. I recommended a full inspection and potential replacement of the pressure seals before returning to production. What happened to that recommendation? It was deferred to the third quarter of the fiscal year. Who made that decision? My supervisor at the time, Devin Brennan, Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations. Did he explain why the inspection was deferred? He indicated that the maintenance budget had been reduced and that the inspection would need to wait until additional funds were available. Victoria continued through the timeline. Each memo I'd written, each warning I'd raised. Each time the warnings had been acknowledged but not acted upon. I answered every question with the same flat, factual tone. No anger, no accusation, just truth documented and testified to under oath. When she finished, Martin Shaw rose for cross-examination. He smiled at me like we were old friends meeting for lunch. Mr. Gallagher, you have 18 years of experience in pharmaceutical operations, correct? Yes. In those 18 years, how many times have you been overruled on maintenance recommendations? I'd have to check my records for an exact number, but it's happened periodically throughout my career. So, being overruled on recommendations isn't unusual in your experience? Correct. In fact, isn't it true that operations directors often make recommendations that are modified based on budget constraints, timing considerations, and other business factors? Yes, that's common. So when Mr. Brennan deferred your inspection recommendation, he was making a routine business decision similar to ones that have been made throughout your career? I paused, considering my answer carefully. The decision-making process was similar. The outcome was not. What do you mean by that? In previous cases where my recommendations were modified, the modifications didn't result in equipment failure and loss of life. In this case, the specific deferrals I documented created conditions that directly contributed to the pressure vessel failure and the deaths of 4 employees. But you can't prove causation, can you? Isn't it possible the vessel would have failed even with the inspection you recommended? Possible, but unlikely. The inspection I recommended would have identified the seal degradation that caused the failure. The recalibration I recommended would have ensured the safety interlocks functioned properly. The vibration analysis would have detected the structural fatigue in time for intervention. Each recommendation addressed specific failure points that contributed to the accident. Shaw shifted strategies. Mr. Gallagher, you sent these recommendations via email to your supervisor. Did you escalate them beyond that? My supervisor was responsible for bringing safety concerns to appropriate parties. I communicated through proper channels. Did you ever go directly to the board of directors with your concerns? That would have violated chain of command protocols. Did you contact OSHA or any external regulatory agency? Not before the accident, no. So despite your concerns, you didn't take steps outside normal procedures to address what you believed were critical safety issues? I followed company protocols for raising concerns. I documented everything. I communicated clearly about the risks. The decision to defer maintenance was made above my level of authority, but you continued to work at Meridian. You didn't resign in protest. You didn't refuse to operate the equipment you believed was unsafe. I felt my jaw tighten. Resignation would have removed my ability to document ongoing concerns and wouldn't have changed the decisions being made. My continued presence allowed me to create the record that's now being used in this trial. Shaw paused, recalibrating. Let me ask you something personal, Mr. Gallagher. You testified that Devin Brennan became your supervisor in January of this year. Prior to that, you reported directly to Hugh Brennan, correct? Correct. Were you expecting a promotion before Mr. Brennan arrived? I had discussions with Hugh Brennan about expanding my role, and when his nephew was brought in above you, how did that make you feel? Victoria Santos objected. Relevance? The judge overruled. Goes to potential bias. Shaw repeated his question. How did you feel when a younger, less experienced person was promoted over you? I answered carefully. I had concerns about whether someone without manufacturing experience was qualified to make decisions about manufacturing operations. Those concerns proved valid, but isn't it possible that your documentation was influenced by resentment? That you were building a paper trail to protect yourself or to undermine a supervisor you didn't respect? I looked directly at Shaw. Mr. Shaw, I documented safety concerns because they were legitimate safety concerns. The fact that those concerns were later validated by a catastrophic accident suggests my documentation was accurate, not biased. 4 people are dead because the warnings I documented were ignored. My feelings about my supervisor are irrelevant to that reality. The courtroom was completely silent. Shaw studied me for a moment, then checked his notes. Nothing further. The judge called a recess. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I caught Hugh Brennan's eye across the courtroom. He looked like a man watching his empire crumble and understanding for the first time that he'd built it on a foundation that couldn't hold. The trial continued for another week. Other witnesses testified. Other documents were examined. But the damage from my testimony was already done. I'd provided the timeline, the documentation, and the context that connected Devin's cost-cutting decisions directly to the accident. The jury had seen the emails. They'd heard me explain exactly what would happen if those recommendations were ignored. And they knew that what I predicted had come true. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. The jury found Meridian Therapeutics liable for negligence in the wrongful deaths of all 4 victims. They found Devin Brennan personally liable for reckless disregard of safety protocols. They awarded $340 million in damages, including punitive damages that reflected the jury's anger at the systematic prioritization of cost savings over human life. When the verdict was read, the families of the victims broke down in tears. Sandra Vega's daughter, who'd been sitting in the courtroom every day, collapsed into her grandmother's arms. Pete Okonkwo's fiancée covered her face with both hands. Jim Morrison's parents held each other like survivors of a shipwreck finally reaching shore. Behind the defense table, Devin Brennan sat frozen. His Yale MBA hadn't prepared him for this. His confidence hadn't protected him from accountability. He was 29 years old and facing personal liability that would follow him for the rest of his life. Hugh Brennan didn't react visibly, just sat there, absorbing the weight of a verdict that would destroy the company he'd spent 30 years building. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the envelope he'd offered me, the suggestion that I shade my testimony to protect his nephew, and my sympathy evaporated. After the verdict, I walked out of the courthouse into October sunshine. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed. I ignored all of it and kept walking until I reached my car. Claire was waiting at home. She'd followed the trial coverage online, even though I'd told her not to. "It's over," I said, sitting down heavily at the kitchen table. "You did the right thing," she replied. "It cost you everything, but you did the right thing." "Not everything," I corrected. "I still have you." She smiled, and for a moment I saw her mother in her face. "Yeah, you still have me." The aftermath unfolded over the following months. Meridian Therapeutics filed for bankruptcy, unable to pay the judgment while maintaining operations. Hugh Brennan resigned as CEO and faced personal bankruptcy proceedings. Devin Brennan's liability followed him through the legal system. Last I heard, he was working at a consulting firm that specialized in corporate turnarounds, which felt like a particularly bitter irony. I was terminated 2 days after the verdict. The official reason was reduction in force due to restructuring, but everyone knew the real reason. I'd testified truthfully, and companies don't keep employees who tell the truth about their failures. The severance package was minimal. The recommendation letter was non-existent. For a few weeks, I worried about what came next. My career in pharmaceutical manufacturing was effectively over. My savings were adequate, but not abundant. I had a daughter approaching college age and no clear path forward. Then the calls started coming, not from pharmaceutical companies, but from law firms. Industrial safety consultants, regulatory agencies, academic institutions. It turned out there was significant demand for someone with 18 years of operational experience, who was known for documenting everything and testifying truthfully, regardless of consequences. Victoria Santos called me personally. "Warren, I know a firm that specializes in industrial safety consulting for plaintiffs' cases. They need someone who understands manufacturing operations and can analyze documentation to identify systemic failures. The pay is good, the work is meaningful, and you'd be helping families like the ones in our case get the accountability they deserve." I thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. When do I start? 6 months later, I was working as a senior consultant for a firm called Archer Safety Associates. My job was to review industrial accident cases, analyze operational documentation, and identify the decision-making failures that led to catastrophic outcomes. The work was exactly what I'd been doing informally for 18 years. Except now, I was paid well for it, and my findings actually made a difference. Claire was thriving. She'd made varsity track as a freshman and was talking about running in college. More importantly, she'd stopped expecting me to disappear into work emergencies. I was home for dinner almost every night. I attended every track meet. I helped with homework without checking my phone every 5 minutes. The trial had cost me my career at Meridian, but it had given me something more valuable, a chance to rebuild my relationship with my daughter while showing her what integrity actually looked like in practice. One evening, almost a year after the verdict, Claire and I were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. She'd just gotten accepted to a summer program at Duke for high school students interested in pre-law. "Dad," she said, "I've been thinking about what happened with Meridian. The whole thing with you testifying and losing your job and everything. What about it? You were pretty scared, weren't you? Before the trial." I was terrified. "But you did it anyway. You told the truth even though you knew it would cost you." I looked at her, this young woman who'd grown up watching me make every wrong choice about priorities and had somehow emerged with a moral clarity I was only now developing. "Claire, I spent 18 years choosing work over family, choosing career advancement over being present for you, choosing to be indispensable at the office while being dispensable at home. When the accident happened and I had to decide whether to protect myself or tell the truth, I realized that all those years of wrong choices had been leading to one moment where I could finally make the right one." She nodded slowly. "That's what I want to write my college essay about. Not the trial specifically, but what you said just now, about how one right choice can start to fix a lot of wrong ones." Smart kid. She'd understood something I was still processing. The past can't be changed, but the future can be shaped by decisions made in the present, and sometimes the most important decision is simply telling the truth when lying would be easier. If you've ever been asked to shade the truth to protect someone powerful, remember this: your testimony is the only thing you truly control. They can take your job, damage your reputation, threaten your future, but they cannot take your integrity unless you give it to them. The families of those 4 workers got justice because someone chose truth over career. That's not heroism, that's just basic decency. The fact that it felt heroic says more about corporate culture than it does about me. The sweetest victories aren't the ones where you outsmart your enemies or accumulate hidden leverage. Sometimes the sweetest victory is simply walking out of a courtroom knowing you told the truth and let the consequences sort themselves out. Sometimes winning means losing everything except the one thing that actually matters. Drop a comment if you've ever had to choose between your career and your conscience. Subscribe for more stories about what happens when ordinary people refuse to let powerful institutions hide their failures. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. The only question is whether you'll be standing with it or running from it.